Our guest today is Elizabeth Lindsey, a National Geographic Fellow and Explorer, a former Miss Hawaii. Around the world, human wisdom and culture are dying at an appalling pace, and Elizabeth Lindsey's mission is to preserve and protect them.
As a child, we lived in a very small village on the north shore of Oahu, and they would go to the ocean and they would start to chant, and they planted by the moon cycles, and they fished according to the moon cycles, which you would understand in your culture. And I knew even as a child that there was something quite extraordinary that these women knew that much of the world didn't know. And then when I was 7 years old, they brought me into the circle and they sat me down. And this is what they said: someday the world will be mad, and they will lack wisdom, and they will have forgotten their wisdom. And it will take the knowledge and the traditions from the far edges of the world to keep the world in balance. And so they predicted, even as young as I was at 7, that someday I would go far away to keep the voices of the ancestors alive. As Miss Hawaii, I ended up being an ambassador of the state, and at 21 I went around the world 3 times. And I started to understand that by being out in the world, there's so much commonality. I mean, when you look into the eyes of a stranger, and I know that you travel a lot, you cannot help but know that you are looking into the eyes of someone who's reflecting back to you a spirit that's very similar to your own.
You parlayed the beauty queen experience to get a PhD in anthropology and ethno-navigation and go on to be part of National Geographic Fellows Program. You have discovered that a lot of human wisdom is dying every single day.
Yes.
Like, give me an example of
well,
what
we lose on average a language every 2 weeks.
Every 2 weeks?
Every 2 weeks. And people don't realize that, because when an elder dies, it's not only the language that we're losing, but the code that's embedded in them, their codes of knowing, the stories, the traditions. When each of these elders die, it's generations of cumulative wisdom that we are losing. We think in the West that we have these answers that are quantifiable and measurable. But I am with teachers like my mentor in Micronesia, Maupiailuk, who was considered the greatest non-instrument navigator in the world. He could sail thousands of miles of open ocean without the use of instruments, just using the rising and setting of stars and the patterns on the ocean and the flight patterns of particular birds. And he had a science and a technology that inspired GPS. So we use GPS, and we don't even look at the source or the origin of that. So when we say, well, what is the relevance of this ancient or ancestral wisdom? Yet we're using technology that was inspired by them. In my life, the richest parts of my life have been that I have had the greatest teachers in the world, and Mao is one of the top of that list. If you can imagine being with someone who can teach you the subtlest changes of the horizon in order to predict tidal waves 4 days in advance. We currently don't have technology that can do that. But a man who observes, because that is one of the ways that they survive on their small islands, is inherent to keeping a culture safe. If we had the capability of marrying, and I believe that we do, marrying the best that technology has to offer with the solidity of wisdom and the stability of wisdom, we would have such a potency, you know, and the legacy that we would pass on to future generations would be immense. The island is called Satawal in Micronesia.
Satawal,
And it was interesting, because I didn't realize before I was starting to prepare for this expedition that no one from the National Geographic had ever been there. And my commitment to their community, as with every community, is that we will keep intact for their descendants whatever knowledge these elders want to share with us. What happened on that island is that the women took care of me, and the men took care of my crew of 6 men. What I saw there absolutely changed my life. It was so profound. There were no mirrors. And what happens is that when you're no longer self-referencing in that way and relying on image as a way of navigating through the world, everything begins to shift. So for example, there were women in their 90s that saw themselves as sensuous and beautiful and would sit under the stars and comb the hair of their granddaughters and sing like little girls and flirt madly with my crew. Because they saw themselves as beautiful.
I'm going to take you all the way from Southwall to Sardinia.
Oh.
So understand, as part of your exploration, as your journey,
Yes.
you went and visited this group of
Centenarians. Yes.
Yeah.
And,
And a whole village of them?
well, a
Yes, I
whole
understand.
island. I mean,
of
in
people
Sardinia.
who are 100 years or more.
100 years or more. And you know, these people are so alert, and I didn't see.
Yeah, that's what I read. So they're 100 years old, but they were not on a bed. They were kind of walking around. And
Oh my
doing this
goodness,
stuff. Yeah.
vibrant. And these are the four themes that we have found.
The 4 secrets. No?
4 secrets.
Yeah.
Where they eat close to source. Many of them have grown food around them, much like your grandparents.
Absolutely, yeah.
And so there's a purity of their diet. So nutrition is really important. Activity throughout their lives is equally important. They have always been active. What they each do is practice a degree of stress reduction, whether it's meditation or worship or whatever it does that decompresses them. But the 4th thing, which I think is the most interesting and the most important, is a sense of belonging.
Community.
Community. What we're trying to do is cultivate and encourage and inspire other people to go into their communities, into their families, and record using any kind of device. To me, it's this intersection, the timing of this great passion and a need that I know that we must accomplish, of being able to record our stories for future generations.